Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Royal Photographic Society and this latest in a series of collections talks. It's a pleasure this evening to hand over to the RPS Historical Group's chair, Gilly Reid, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you, Gilly.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I will introduce tonight Susan M. Harris from the British Library. And this is a talk on the Dillwyn Llewelyn Story-Maskelyne archive. The Fox Talbot family seem to have tentacles everywhere, certainly in South Wales, where the collections of these people lived. So it's a very wide reading thing. Susan is a design historian specialising in photography's material and visual culture. And she is the cataloguer of photographs and part of the Unlocking Hidden Collections initiative, which I think is a very good idea, at the British Library. Susan has also worked on various projects at the V&A Museum, including the Royal Photographic Society collection and Google Arts and Culture Digitisation project. She has written pieces for the Royal Photographic Society Journal, the British Library and Victoria and Albert Museum. She completed her MA in History of Design on the early British photographic dry plate industry at the Royal College of Art. And so now I think I should hand over to Susan.
Thank you, Gilly, for that introduction, and thank you, Michael, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. As Gilly said, my name is Susan Harris. I'm the cataloguer of photographs for the British Library. The British Library is the National Library of the United Kingdom. It came into existence in 1973 as the result of the British Library Act. The British Library brings together the collections of various historical organisations, including the British Museum Library, the National Lending Library, the Indian Office Collections, the National Sounds Archives, and the Patent Office Library. It contains over 170 million items, including books, journals, newspapers, patents, maps, prints, manuscripts, stamps, photographs, sound recordings, digital publications of all kinds, and over 1 billion pages of UK web content. Photographs can be found across all collections of the library and spans the history of the medium from the earliest years. The core photographic collection at the British Library sits in the visual arts section. This section has a wide remit for prints, drawings, and photographs, as well as sculpture and furniture, which were formerly part of the Indian Office collections. This includes the former Indian Office Photographic collection that consists over 400,000 items that date from circa 1850s onwards. The collection focuses on topographical and architectural photographs relating to India, Pakistan, and other parts of Asia, including Afghanistan, Tibet, Nepal, Burma, and China. Since 2006, this section has looked after more recent acquisitions such as the Talbot Archive, the Kodak Historical Archive, and the Fay Godwin Archive. The Talbot collection, which comprises a major archive of correspondence, notebooks, photographs, and other materials relating to the life and works of the British inventor of photography, William Henry Fox Talbot. The Kodak collection that represents a major resource for the study of technical and commercial and cultural development of photography from the late 19th century, transferred from Kodak Limited to the library in 2009, contains over 40,000 items. and the Faye Godwin collection contains the photograph's complete studio collection, including exhibition and print works, contact sheets, negatives, transparencies, and correspondence with a number of sitters. I am working on the Dillwyn Llewelyn and Story-Maskelyne photographic archive as part of the library's Unlocking the Hidden Collections initiative, where I'm responsible for cataloguing, sorting, and researching the 19th and 20th century global photographic collections and promoting access to these materials with the aim of to provide a valuable resource for researchers and British library users. In this talk, I'll be looking at the Dillwyn Llewelyn Story-Maskelyne photographic archives, which consists of 9 albums containing photographs, watercolour, drawings, letters, and papers. There's also 2 portfolios of watercolour drawings. There are 7 journals and 4 volumes of memoir, which is also part of this archive. These are held in the British Library's Western Manuscript Collection. In this talk, I'll be focusing on Thereza Dillwyn Llewelyn because the collection is mainly her albums and scrapbooks and journals. I will start by introducing Thereza and then go on to looking, in this talk I'll start by introducing Thereza and then go on looking at the period of photography which this collection relates to and an overview of what was happening in photography at the time. I'll look at the family tree and the relationship to William Henry Fox Talbot and the family members, highlighting how the whole family was involved in photographic activities. I will also look at the problem of identifying the authorship of photographs and how Thereza's journals highlighted her photographic activities, looking at one of her cameras, her eye for composition, what photographs she took, and what inspired her, her experimentations in photography, and how she used photography for her other interests. I will end on looking at photography, her future husband, and photography after marriage. I'm going to use her journals from May, which date from May 1856 to August 1857, and her memoir written around 1923, which provides a wonderful source of information on her photographic activities as well as her other scientific pursuits. Thereza was the oldest child of John and Emma Dillwyn Llewelyn, born on the 3rd of May in 1834 into a wealthy Welsh family who was interested in many areas of science. Quote, "My earliest recollection connected with photography carried me back to somewhere about 1841 when I was a child, and I sat for my portrait taken by my father." She goes on to saying how that no one living at the estate could help being interested in or what was absorbing interest to her parents, and she must have heard many conversations on the subject when letters arrived from her mother from her cousin Henry Fox Talbot. This shows that she was part of photography from the start, or was influenced by photography from the start. The most productive period for the family's photography activities was between 1841 and 1856. This collection goes beyond that, as there's photos that date up to the 1920s, but the majority sits within the 1940s to the 1950s. This period of photography was one of invention and exploration. It sits between the invention of early photography and the commercialization of photography. Photography of this time was basically for the wealthy, as it took time and money. A significant change happened in 1851 when Frederick Scotch Archer published his wet collodion process. This consists of coating a glass of plate with collodion and then making it light sensitive with further chemicals. And before the plate could dry, you'd have to place it into a camera and expose it, and then return it to the darkroom, develop, rinse, fix, and dry it off. But with this negative, you could take multiple prints. The pros were rich details and rich tones and a short exposure time, but the cons were the whole process from start to finish had to be done before the plate drew out. You were limited to what you could photograph, and if you wanted to photograph outside, you'd have to take the darkroom with you. This gave opportunity for other photographers not only to take photographs, but to experiment and investigate in ways with collodion process. Seeing that this talk is about Thereza, I should address women in photography during this period. It wasn't common for women to practice photography, but photographic journals were recognizing that women were interested in photography, either assisting their fathers and husbands or even taking their own photographs. In the Liverpool Photographic Journal, Volume 2, Number 1, January 13th, 1855, has an article on photographs for ladies on the practice of photographic process. It starts with the selecting of a camera and implements, quote, "the whole of which will of course be gladly selected and presented to our fair pupils by their photographic husbands, brothers, etc., as a peace offering," end of quote. So women weren't taken too seriously. Now I'll look at the family tree and the link to Henry Fox Talbot. This is a simple family tree. There you can see that the link is by marriage, and I've highlighted in blue Thereza there. So we've got William Fox Talbot. He was the first cousin to Thereza's mother, Emma. He was a photographic pioneer who invented the saltpaper print and the calotype. Based on his experiments, he began in early 1834. He announced his calotype process in 1841, which was a negative positive process. And that then the next main photographer was John Dillwyn Llewelyn. He was Thereza's father, married to Emma. Known as the first photographer in Wales, he was also part of Talbot's circle of photography. He was also known for his oxymel process, which he announced in 1856. By improving on the Archer's wet collodion process, this process enabled photographers to prepare plates beforehand and carry them around ready for use when needed. The process involved your collodion process, then drying the plates, and then coating the plates with a weak solution of oxymel, a mixture of vinegar and honey. This mixture could be mixed at home or purchased from the chemist at this time. The Illustrated London News in the 26th of July 1856 quoted, "We have heard of a method of preserving collodion plates for a week or a fortnight, discovered by Mr. Llewelyn, a gentleman to whom all photographers owe a world of thanks. The plates may be prepared at home and boxfuls taken out." Now, in the family, there were members of the women in the family were in the background and were less known figures in the photography history. One of them was John's sister, Mary Llewelyn. Her photographs were mainly of photos and flowers and animals, as well as friends and family. She had a preference for a smaller camera with a shorter exposure time. And another woman would be her mother, Emma. While there's not many, if at all, any photographs attributed to her, she did most of her printing for her husband. And that in a letter written to Talbot, she was asking if he wanted to come up and visit when his wife and daughters were visiting, and also stated that he could give lessons in his photographic process. Emma quoted, "Being as we are zealous photographers, an everyday occupation here." That also the family, in fact, nearly all of the family were involved in photographic activities. I'd like to point out within this photo, which was taken in 1854, how at ease the family was in front of the camera. And it kind of shows how much photography was integrated in everyday family life. Everyday family life was situated in the Pengareth estate on the outskirts of Swansea, Wales. It was a home to the family from 1817 to 1937. The estate had landscape gardens, an upper and lower lake, an artificial waterfall, and an observatory. The house no longer exists, but public can still enjoy the surroundings. As you can see, there was a lot of family doing photography, and the albums frequently contained work of more than one individual, as nearly every member of the family and their friends were involved in photographic activities. Some of the albums have initials near the photo and some are without. So when looking through the collection, you have to keep an open mind. Most of the photos are contributed to the male members of the family. This period was particularly a patriarchal patriarchal society where women remained in the background, marrying and raising the family. Any credit for anything they did was assumed by the male family members. In this case, the majority of photos in the albums are attributed to Thereza's father, John, or later to her husband, Neville. However, Thereza was more than an interested bystander, but a keen photographer who experimented with the opportunities that early photographic processes offer. Indeed, one could argue that some of the photographs attributed to the male family members may have been taken by her. The reason why there is a bit of a confusion is that family and friends would go on photographic exhibitions there. This is true with this example here of the haymakers. As I quote, then we all photographed the haymakers, cart, horses and all. I made 2 good ones of the Welsh people and one of Emma and Eleanor and Lucy in the hay. Papa made some beauties. Another example of identifying authorship of photographs was with this one of Thereza seated at the window of Oystermouth Castle. This image is attributed to her Aunt Mary, but was taken with a larger camera, which was unusual for her. It was recorded that Mary was using Thereza's own camera, which was bigger than her own. Looking at into the details, the family used initials on photographs. As you can see on this photograph, you can see bottom right a little MD there. But what was quite interesting is that Thereza's older daughter Mary records in her book on Bassett Downs, she mentions that her father John took the photo. So you can see the confusion when identifying the photographer. Right, here we get to Thereza's journals. Thereza's journals have highlighted not only her photographic activities, but also the family's. The journals start on the 3rd of May, 1856. Thereza's birthday, quoting, this day being my 22nd birthday, I consider it a good one for commencing what I often wish to do, a journal on a larger scale than what I could write in my notebook. I shall commence by describing the occupations of the day. The entry for that day includes photography activities. Quote, I developed a photograph and then had some breakfast. Then I made a photo of my grandmother's grave according to my mother's wishes. Note that in the journal you can notice a little sketch there of a churchyard in ink, and on the photograph on the right resembles the sketch, but the photographer of that photograph is noted unknown, and that it ends up being a bit of a guesswork if Thereza took the photo or not. On her birthday, she was staying at Penrith with her aunt during the whole month of May, and wasn't with the rest of the family. In her journal, she notes going out photographing with her relative Annie. Quote, I had a boy carry my camera up the hill. I did a view in the village. I had a crowd of wanderers around me, and one boy put the wheelbarrow in position for me. I allowed him and another boy to look through the view. A man who, quote, had seen such things before and had seen pictures made, very, end quote, very obligingly offered his assistance, but as we were two, we declined. In a letter her mother wrote to Talbot 2 months later, not only highlighted Thereza's growing interest in photography, but also said, quote, the larger photographs were made especially for you last summer. I have been hoping ever since to get a few more. The smaller ones were made by Thereza this spring. She was there with her Aunt Mary. And these two photos here are in the Talbot collection, and I see that they might relate to the letter and be the two photographs that she sent on to Talbot. Okay. Also for her birthday, she received a camera. This camera was a Murphy and Heath single lens stereo camera. This is the actual camera. It is held by the Museum of Wales. As you can see, that you load the plate in the back kind of door thing, and you focus your shot, and then you slide the whole back mechanism along, and you'll be able to take 2 photographs. Here's an example. So here is the 2 photographs, the negatives there, and and then you have the print. This is a print of her brother, William, sitting in front of the door to the conservatory with a puppy on his lap. She said with the camera, she said, I tend to work hard with it so as to get some pictures worthy of it. She definitely had a visual eye for composition. Quote, when we got down to the beach, we saw some vessels come closer in to the shore. They were getting quite close to the trees in the churchyard, the tide being fully up. Quite a unique place for ships. Such a calm and lovely evening to boot. I could not resist the wish to photograph the scene, so we walked home as quickly as possible in request of a camera. Having got it and a boy to carry it, I walked back 1¼ miles in 20 minutes and did the view. Unfortunately, the vessels were not steady, and as I imagined, well, not steady as I imagined they were, and that spoiled the photo. The quote not only highlighted that she had an eye for composition and could see things to photograph, but also the desire, instead of drawing a scene, wanting to photograph it. Here showed she she was an excellent watercolorist, This is one of her watercolors. In the collection has various watercolor drawings. This watercolor is for her travels to Norway with her husband and his sister Agnes. Her excuse me. She and her sisters had a drawing teacher when they were teenagers. So what did she photograph? Even though there's not many photographs to her name, her journal gives you an insight on what she photographed. The album contains photographs of friends and family, different family estates and nature, as well as landscapes. Here is a picture that she took of some friends. Quote, "We went to Castlewell, where we spent a very pleasant day with the Smiths and made acquaintances with the 5 younger children whose portraits I took. I also did a stereoscope view on the rocks of the west side of the bay. It was a lovely day, very suitable for photography." And family, this is the 2 photographs of her brothers, John and William. And that, as you notice in these photographs, below on the right is what looks like an L, but is actually a T, meaning Thereza. And she also went out photographing with her father. This is one where she was with her father photographing a scene of the family set up. Quote, "After lunch, Emma dressed up as a gypsy and Willie made a capital hut and represented a wildly looking gypsy man looking out, whilst Emma seated on a basket turned topsy-turvy, told Carolyn's fortune. Papa photographed the scene, which was very picturesque and pretty, and I made a stereoscope photo thereof." On the left is her father's photograph, and on the right is hers. And here we go. Right. She also photographed landscape and nature, and that this is one that she mentions, saying, "I made a photograph of a rocky pool with Gwyneth du Point, excuse my pronunciation, in the distance. The rocks were covered in seaweed, which now the tide was out, hang over the edge in a beautiful fringe." Though the photograph there is attributed to her father, you've got to question that is it her father, or could this be one of hers? Not only taking photos, so she was influenced and had by photography and the photographic processes that were coming about. She kept abreast of what's happening in photography with the changes and was ahead of new processes, as well as being very aware that photography was becoming more marketable or commercialized. This photograph here is the Brig by Legray. She says in her journal that, "Oh, another photographic wonder in the shape of the most exquisite photo of clouds and the sun behind them." shedding a bright patch of light on the sea beneath, through which a vessel is sailing at full speed. She doesn't mention the photographer or the photograph, but it seems to be described just like the brig by Le Gray. The brig at that time, this photograph was really famous in Europe. In the 2 months that orders were open, when it came out, within 2 months, 800 copies were ordered. And this would be around the same time, 1856. Again, as a family, they went to exhibitions. This is a good quote from when they went to the Photographic Society exhibition in London in 1857. We spent a good time there, being our last chance of seeing what had been done by other photographers. To me, that gives an idea that she knew she was a photographer too. During the past year, we saw some very fine views done by Fenton, by Mr. White. Relander had some portraits in very daft positions that amused us, and some wonderful photos made up of a number of negatives. So this photograph is Fenton, and then we have Henry White, and Relander drat the east wing, which was made up of various negatives. She also experimented as well. At this time, a lot of processes were coming out trying to stabilize the collodion dry plate, the collodion wet plate. You have heard of her father's oxymel process. Even so, they experimented in other processes like the dry collodion plate by Dr. Richard Hill Norris. She saying about experiments, she quotes, "Papa left me his dry collodion plates for me to expose for him. I photographed also on my own account using a charming new bath that Papa gave me, and that it was made on purpose for my small plates. I took my camera to the lower lake. Then we developed the collodion dry collodion plates. They proved not satisfactory. We're going back to Papa's oxymel." But she didn't stop. She kept on experimenting with the dry plates, and this is taken here on dry plate. Another lovely, bright and fresh day. I took my prepared plate down to the iron well and made a very good stereoscope of it. I only exposed the two pictures for 20 and 30 seconds, which was wonderfully short for a dry process. And she goes on, photographed successfully on dry collodion. Now, as you notice here, the negative is actually, again, attributed to her father. But the quote from her journal kind of feels like it is her. She was also into many other scientific pursuits, as in biology and astronomy. Combining her other interests with photography, as in here, she photographed and named plants all morning. She also used different processes. The one on the left is a photographic engraving, while the one on the right is a negative paper contact. Also with astronomy, both Thereza and her father were keen amateur astronomers. Her father built her observatory near her house, and then proceeded to set up a camera there. Quote, "I had a camera fastened to the end of the telescope. Then later the next day, in the evening, I went with Papa to try the telescope camera, and we found it did not answer as it was. Though it was successful later on." In her memoirs, she quotes, "My father made a photo of the moon, and as the moonlight requires such a long exposure, it was my business to keep the telescope moving steady, as there was no clockwork action." And so this is the trial of taking photographs of the moon. So here we have Neville Story-Maskelyne, and that he was a professor at Oxford and also a keeper of minerals at the British Museum from 1857 to 1888. He was also interested in photography and was part of Talbot's circle of early photographers. Neville knew Talbot due to them being neighbours. Neville lived in Bassett Downs, while Talbot at Laycock. Thereza and Neville both shared their enthusiasm for both photography and astronomy. This is shown in a letter here during their courtship. On the right is one of the earliest photographs of Saturn taken by him, and that in December 1857. He took the photo for Thereza, his future wife. In a letter he explained, "I have seen such sights. Saturn with a power of 700 without a tremor, a very spectacle of wonder and delight." And then he noted, "In fact, I'm going to send an exact picture of what I saw." The library has both the wonderful letter and the little photograph, which is in one of the scrapbooks. So they were married in June 1858. The library also has a collection of his works, which includes paper negatives, salt paper prints, and collodion on mica negatives, and research papers on early photography. Okay. And then after they were married, in her memoirs, she mentions that she focused more on the family and running a household. So there was less experimentation of photography, but there was still photographs of the family. Here is two photographs of the family there. one showing the humorous side there and of the family. Thereza is the woman dressed in black, and Neville is the man with the bowler hat. As you can see, there is a camera on the left, and they are surrounded by members of the family. The photograph on the right is taken by Thereza. This is her oldest daughter, Mary, and her first grandson, William, along with her husband. This was taken in 1890. She also took photographs while travelling. What you have to consider now that these photographs were taken in 1889. During this time, the commercialization of photography came out with the dry plate process, making it easy to take photographs, and you didn't have to prepare them, you just had to buy them. So this is the trip around Europe. And this is another image of her travels in Europe. This is one of my favorite photos of her because of not only the composition, the wonderful perspective leading your eye down to the cathedral, but also representing daily life. It has been an absolute joy working on this collection. I am honoured to share part of it with you today. This collection highlights that Thereza was a 19th century photographer during a period of discovery and experimentation in photography. Thank you very much. And also, if there's further information there, if you want to get in contact and see any of the collection. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Susan, for that. So that was lots of new information and some wonderful photographs. And I think you're right, it must be an incredible privilege to be able to work on that collection and start to make some of the identification that you mentioned. There's a couple of questions that have come in.
Okay.
So the first one picks up the point you made at the beginning of your presentation about opening up the collection at the British Library, and which sort of prompts the question, how does one actually get access to the material?
Okay, here is further information on how you get access to the material. The British Library has a print room which is currently open by appointment with a reader's pass, so you definitely have a reader's pass. At the moment, it's only open Monday and Friday mornings from 10 to 12:30. Hopefully in the future it will be open during the other days during the week. And also for any inquiries and appointments, I have put down the 2 emails that you can use. Does that answer the question? And I've also put in how to search the photographic collections there. You can search it through the National Archives Discovery Catalogue by putting in British Library photo.
Thank you. The other question here is regarding Thereza's journals, and I just wondered whether it had been transcribed and whether that was accessible, or does one need to go and consult the original?
One needs to go and consult the original. It hasn't been transcribed at the moment.
Right. Thank you. Is there any questions from our audience? No. Okay, in that case, that probably brings us to the end. So thank you so much for talking and showing us some of those wonderful photographs that you're working on. And thank you, Gilly, for arranging the talk this evening with Susan. It's been a delight to see that and to hear you talk about Thereza, and especially the role of women in early photography. I know there's some people in the audience this evening that have done an awful lot of work in that, but it's still something that deserves to be highlighted. So thank you for drawing attention to Thereza and her contemporaries. It's been great to hear that. And
eye-opener. I think there were a lot of women early in photography, actually, if you can find them.
Yes. Yes.
And Rose Teamby's been finding lots of them and drawing attention to them. So I'm sure we'll hear more about that in due course. So thank you, Susan, for the presentation again this evening. Thank you, Gilly, for arranging it. And thank you to our audience for listening and participating. We've got more talks scheduled. The next one in a couple of weeks' time, which we'll include a link for after this event, is with Paul Frecker, who's going to be talking through the carte de visite based on his recent book called Cartomania, which has just been published and is highly recommended. So come back to listen to Paul talk about the carte de visite. So we'll send out a link for that in due course. So thank you, everyone, and good night.